All right. I'm going to see if I can. Oh, there we go. All right. I'm going to put my slides up here in a moment, but I'm not going to lie. I am not a techie person. I am a mom and a chiropractor who love to help other parents. So if we got to double click on a couple things, just, you know what, bear with me. But first, can you hear me? I should say that because sometimes I did check my audio, but can you hear me? You wouldn't know that I've done hundreds of these based on the number of tech problems I tend to run into. So we are gonna go. I'm live and we are going to start my little thing. So let me just double click here to make sure you guys can see my slides. And oh, I see a couple of you on there. Okay. Hang on, I'm gonna have to double click again here, and then I think click to get my face back is what I figured out. Yes, okay, so many clicks on here. You know what, I couldn't not talk about this topic. It had started coming up time and time again, not only with adults, but teens. Over and over and over, we are tackling in our office and just in our life, because now I have teens of my own, teen anxiety. And it's been a really big struggle. It's been a really big soft spot in my heart, because, you know, I feel like as you grow with your kids, you just end up falling in love with their new ages. And I just fell in love with teenagers. I think they're so wonderful and they're great. And then you start to interact with teenagers that are really high anxiety and high stress, and they just take in this world at a different rate than we do. And to really break it down and start to understand it, I thought was super important to bring to parents, because if this is your first teen, like this is my first teen, man, there's a lot to learn. You know, they've got a whole different language, I swear, that they talk in, and tech is weird. You know, they're living on social media. There's just so many things. So if you're on here as a parent, which I'm assuming you are, and you are just doing the best you can with your child, which is all that we ever do, because I always say we're all amateurs, raised by amateurs. I don't know any professional parents yet. Introduce me to one when you meet them, because I would like to, quiz them on things. But it's seriously, I am a person that has to understand, like, why is something happening? What's going on? It's probably the engineering side of my family that I grew up in. But if I don't understand the why and the core of what's going on and how to help, then I don't know how to move forward in helping. So my background is in neurology and pediatrics, and if teens, of course, fall into that. So as soon as this even started hitting really close to home, with patients coming in my office, and then my own teen, I'm like, we are going to do a webinar about this. We're going to talk about this. And man, my feed instantly filled up with people that registered for this. So I know it's hitting really close to home for a lot of other people too. So I'm going to take a little bit of a broader approach to talk about, you know, how the brain is working and what's happening inside of teens. But some of the things that I'm going to talk about are relative to any human, you know, in the way that our brains start to fire and wire under stress. And I often say that anxiety or anxiousness is excitement without breath. We aren't breathing through it. We're just holding all sorts of energy up. We don't know what to do with that emotion. And I feel like a lot of symptomatology is really our body giving us data and information to say there's something going on here. And just like your kids, if you listen to them when they're whispering, you won't have to have them, you know, you won't have to hear them scream. And you also want to tell that to your kids too, right? Like, dude, if you just listen the first time I tell you, then I'm gonna be here yelling at you. I get it. So when you get data and information from the body, it's symptomatology, whatever you want to call it, a label. Some people might be already diagnosed with something. I say, okay, let's look at that information and figure out where it's coming from, because that's just a sign your body is telling you something needs to change. There's something stuck here. There's stress here. And we need to take that and figure out the core of what's going on, instead of necessarily, you know, covering up symptoms or finding a stickier Band-Aid, as I always say. And there's lots of things we can do, tips, tricks, tools, you know, that you could Google all day long of like what to do, natural, you know, remedies for anxiety, what what should, ADHD, anything. You can Google things to do, but if we're not down to the heart of the issue and understanding how the brain's getting information, we don't know how to take real action steps to help resolve the issue. And that's what I'm all about, is getting some resolution. Because I'm a firm believer the bodies are designed to self-heal, self-regulate, be healthy. We've got to give it the right environment, which is really, really key here. And I hope you guys walk away with some action steps to take right away to be able to help your teen or tween. Now, you guys, I have a 12-year-old, and I'm like, dude, this guy is like, I don't know. He's no walk in the park. And an 8-year-old, but my 16-year-old, even when he started struggling, it really started to come in the height of, I just hate to say this word, the pandemic. But this is where we really started to see it with other teens start to build momentum. And when you take a look at what a teen's brain is doing, or a tween, or any sort of child that you're looking at, their brain is different than ours. Their brain is still developing. Where an adult brain, we're kind of steady in our beliefs. They can always change. And I pulled up this little, I'm going to call it like a map, but it's not. It is a chart from Harvard, where they look at age across the bottom and the amount of effort it takes to change the brain and the brain's ability to change in responses. So that blue line, look at how quickly the brain can change from 2 to 20. I mean, it's so high. Birth to 3, we know that's the most rapid part of brain development. But now as a teenager, their brains are still not fully developed. I'm going to talk about something called the prefrontal cortex here in a little bit. When we start adding on stressors, when we started separating them from friends, when their brain isn't fully, understanding what's going on around them, we kept them out of school. They were on screens. They're put on a mask, don't put on a mask. Can I go out to the grocery store? There's so much happening. And now, as they're starting to shape what reality is to them, there's a lot of stress that started coming about. And I thought that this was going to be an important picture to show, to look at. Yeah, you're right. My kids' experience compared to what I'm experiencing. I mean, adults were obviously stressed as well, but the kids are still shaping their map in their brain of what the world is. So I want to show you guys a couple different pictures of what that looks like neurologically as well. As we know that the brain's in control of it and of everything. We look at the brain all the time. We spend billions of dollars in neuroscience and psychology and psychiatrists to be like, okay, they need a neuropsych eval, they need a psych evaluation, they need this. And we're constantly looking at the brain and how it's working. And we forget that it's connected at this wonderful, beautiful brainstem to something called the nervous system that's controlling everything inside the body. It's how the brain is picking up information. And when we start to see what we don't put that picture together of looking at the nervous system and the brain's reactivity to the information it's been given, because it really can only do the best it can with what it's been given. You put yourself in a stressful situation, stress in is stress out. And the biggest problem is when we get stuck there. And a brain that's still wiring, it starts getting stuck in fight or flight or stress, which I'm going to talk to you about here in a moment. I'm sure all of you guys have heard of fight or flight. It's not a big, it's not a new thing to talk about. But if you start to understand what sort of changes the body goes on inside the brain and the body physiologically, it's going to start answering some more of your questions on what's going on and what sort of physiological response we're having to our environment. Because it's very amazing how many of us can be sitting in the same situation, the same room, we're sitting with our spouse, we're sitting with our child, we're hearing the same information, and it's perceived through an entirely different lens than somebody else. Somebody else, it might really irritate them what they just heard. And somebody else, they might be excited about what they just heard, happy, sad. I mean, our nervous system is a filter and a lens in which all of the information is given. And that filter seriously, seriously matters. I don't know if you guys know who Bruce Lipton is, but he's one of my favorite scientists and PhDs. He's written a lot of books in the biology of belief. He's done all sorts of things inside science and the lab. And he looks at epigenetics, which I know a lot of people pay really close attention to genetics. They're like, man, I had anxiety and sister had it. And, whoever else has it, now my kid has it, it's in their genes or it's genetic. And it's really environmental. And that's what he was able to prove even in the lab, enucleating cells and pulling out the DNA and watching those cells live to realize that DNA isn't the brain of that cell. The DNA is the reproduction of that cell. And his joke was that, it was probably a man that figured it out, that we're thinking with their gonads instead of their brain, which I, of course, have to laugh at. The environment is really what's key. When you look inside of the body and all of the cells, they're so interconnected. It's connected, of course, every single cell inside of your body is connected to that nervous system. It all has a neurological supply, and our cells are all a community as well inside of our body. When there's chaos in one area, there's going to be chaos inside of the community, just like there would be, downtown Eagle, Idaho. Some sort of chaos is going to take a lot of energy inside of the body to pay attention to, and the same thing situationally. One of my favorite lines is, you live your life through your nervous system, which is just what I was talking about. Every single thing we think, say, do, taste, smell, touch has to be processed through that nervous system. And if that lens is jaded or filtered, then that filter is stressed, and every single message is going to come through a jaded or filtered lens. And that's where we start to see our teens and even ourselves getting tricked, triggered differently or easily, or situational awareness is what we call it. There's situationally, you feel like it shouldn't be that sort of a dramatic response, and it really is. And it really is a physiological change going on inside the body. We've got all these wonderful pathways and neural pathways that have been built up over learning and what we've experienced in life, and they're still gaining all of those experiences, but they're still mostly developing that brain, and it's not going to be fully developed till about 25. So when you look at the nervous system itself, that fight or flight response is completely opposite to the resting response. So if you guys have heard of fight or flight, sympathetic nervous system versus parasympathetic, resting, healing, and digesting, they're complete opposites. So let me just kind of show you neurologically what that looks like. And I know my head's probably in the way for some of you guys to be able to see of how different they are. Your fight or flight response and your parasympathetic, but that fight or flight response is an amazing thing to have. It is what saves your life under threat. It is designed to perceive threats and react to them, and really quickly. Usually, if you're in traffic, someone, the car stops in front of you really quickly, bang, you can really quickly hit your brakes. Sometimes before you even knew you were supposed to hit the brakes, like your nervous system just reacts. That's that fight or flight response. Same thing, you're taking out the trash and there's a bear. You're fight, flight, freeze. Your body is going to respond real quick because it just perceived that threat, and it takes seconds for that to take in effect, full effect, where you're looking at 1,200 chemicals dumped throughout the body and your senses turning way up. I mean, your vision is ready to run or flee. You've got your hearings turned up so you can hear. Your touch is ready, ready to run, ready to figure out what you have to do next. All of the blood goes out to the limbs. You've got just everything pumping to the muscles because you're ready for a fight or to flee. Heart rate's up, blood pressure's up. And what starts turning down is your immune response, your digestion, any sort of response that's going to be parasympathetic, rest, heal, digest is all turned down when that fight or flight system is turned up. And it's, once again, a wonderful thing to be in, unless you're stuck there, unless you stay there, unless you're idling in fight or flight. You are triggered so much easier. And this parasympathetic is where the healing, resting, digesting occurs. It should be happening just while you're sleeping. Our kids need so much rest because that's where they're going to grow. And our teenagers, when they're stuck in fight or flight and that system's not turning off, we're also missing out on parasympathetic, and we often start to see other issues come along, like reproductive, like our endocrine response. Our gut motility starts turning down. And one part of our immune system that turns up is inflammation. Inflammation is up in the body because it's ready for a wound to heal an injury. And that's a lot of what we're seeing our teens struggling with. It might not only be some emotional dysregulation, but now we've coupled it with digestive, with hormonal, and endocrine, and immune struggles. And now we really have a big battle going on, and you're not sure which one to tackle. And it can be really, really challenging for families to be able to navigate. Here's a picture if any of our patients are watching on here. I know many that were registered are new to us, and looking at this, what we call an HRV, when somebody's stuck in fight or flight, that's what we're measuring on this scan. We're taking a look at somebody in idle, somebody at rest, someone under seemingly calm, no stimulus. How's the body reacting? And that HRV gives us a really good picture. So when you're looking at anything to the left would be somebody stuck in fight or flight. To the right, somebody stuck in healing, which is actually an exhausted place to be. That's somebody that's probably depressed. And we can bounce back and forth between anxiety and depression, and that's how that happens as well. Anybody that's over here is idling in fight or flight. And if you can imagine, even like a car, that when you're idling with your RPMs turned up, we're really revving that engine and with no need, right? Without anywhere to go. And that's kind of how they are. There's energy without breath. They're just, it's all getting bottled up inside. That fight or flight response is going off. The senses are turned up. They're starting to get really irritable. It's like us, sitting, cooking dinner. Someone's talking to you, the phone's ringing, your kid's crying, the dog's barking, just so much happening. And you're like, oh, what's going on? Imagine having that all the time and not being able to be calm. That's where this starts to come into play. And, I'm not into diagnosing, and we don't do any diagnosing in our office. Instead, we look for a way for the body to run at its very best. That's when you start to see sustained stress over time, is when we see a consequence of that, where we start now neurologically firing and wiring in that fight or flight response. We're missing out so much on that rest, heal, digest, and things are just going amok inside of that body. Because if you remember, the nervous system controls every cell in the body to change the physiological response of every single cell to respond to the stimulus the brain is getting. And this can start to be a really big challenge when you're on that healing path of like, where are we going to go first? We're going to help their mind or their body. And it's really has to be a bigger picture, and everything has to fall into place together. And when that nervous system is clear, what we find is everything else, the brain can prioritize first of all, but everything else starts to fall into place with so much more ease. You're not hitting up against a brick wall. We'll often hear people say, oh, I took my child to, wherever. We went to a therapist, we went to neurofeedback, we went to, talk therapy, play therapy, wherever we did, we tried medication and it didn't work, it didn't change things, or we got plateaued. Well, often the nervous system's stuck, so you can't trick it for that long. You can get to plateau at whichever degree your nervous system's working at, but you are going to plateau when you have a stuck system that's there. So when you look at this picture, that word in the middle, this big red thing, I want you to think of stress that's been stuck on. That's a subluxation. That's what chiropractors are looking at when we see really stuck stress that hasn't been turned off. That fight or flight system hasn't turned off. And often what's happening is we're feeding it. It becomes very cyclical when we're under stress. One of the first things that we often do when we're under stress, which I'm sure people can relate to, is looking for ways to numb it. So, whether it's through food, through, maybe social media, television, technology, friends, sports, hopefully not any drugs, but that can start to happen as well. We're looking for ways to shut that off. And, usually the food choices aren't great when you're under stress. Your brain needs really quick energy. So it's a lot of sugar, it's a lot of carbs, and you're like, man, I can't get my teen to eat well, or even maybe yourself when you're under stress. Like, that's what the body's craving right now. It doesn't want to rest and digest, spinach salad at the moment. It just doesn't have the time for that when it's trying to live. And fight or flight, really, that's what it's designed to, for survival. But you can't be in growth and protection at the same time. And our kids need to be growing, their brains need to be calm. We don't want those neural pathways to be the ones that are being paid over and over again. Nerves that fire together start wiring together. So you need to take a really good look at what's going on in the environment. And I know that's obviously easier to change when the body's not in fight or flight. So once we say put the fire out, but look at what's going around them in their environment. What kind of environment you're putting in them in. And remember, their brains and bodies are being shaped right now. So these three stress forms, we call physical, chemical, or emotional. Chiropractors call them the 3 T's. They're easier to remember, but thoughts, traumas, toxins. And that can really keep our body stuck there. So chemical stresses, we know it's really hard to avoid chemicals. You can do the very best you can in your home to avoid what's going inside of their bodies, what's going on their skin, what's going in their mouths, what they're ingesting. It can be a really huge piece of the puzzle to keep that fight or flight response going. And the body, there's been, I think, 80,000 chemicals released into the environment that haven't been tested on the nervous system or immune system of humans. The body is under constant attack. If you guys really like science and learning about what happens inside of the brain and neural pathways, I've got some other webinars on that as well that'll be able to help you through it. The physical stress is a huge piece of our teens, and it's not moving your body too much. It's not falling, although you might have a sensory seeking kid that likes the adrenaline junkie, and they are literally falling off their skateboard and their mountain bikes and, trying to do things like that, parkour and all the things that are popular. But a physical stress that's worse is sitting still, is sitting in front of a screen, their head down in front of a phone. Technology, gaming, not moving your body is a huge physical stress compared to literally taking a fall. And we know falls aren't fun either, and you have to heal and repair from them. But when it's chronic non-movement, if I could put a third T on here, it's technology. It's really covering all of these: physical, chemical, and emotional stress. And the emotional piece is what we'll see is that your brain doesn't know whether or not they are in that stressful situation emotionally or they're thinking about it. It's the same physiological response. So you can see how this cycle goes over and over and over again: interference, irritation, inflammation inside of the body. And once again, it's hard to navigate all of the environmental changes when you're stuck with a teen that's like, I feel so stressed. I can't even think about, changing what's going on in my diet or chemicals or any other piece of this, moving my body. I'm so exhausted. That's when you're saying, let's put this fire out and then let's take baby steps forward. So when you're in fight or flight, Marty talks about most of these senses are turned up. It makes you really irritable. Digestion is down. You're not moving your food through. You're not digesting the nutrients you need. Your immune system's down. The inflammation's up, and your endocrine is back and forth. Endocrine can really, and that's your hormones. One thing you don't want teenagers out of whack with is the hormones, for sure. And what happens under fight or flight with the brain is we become very, very impulsive and reactive. That's that quick response of the nervous system to react to whatever happened. Well, we've all been in that situation when we're in fight or flight and we did something or said something that we're like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. You just reacted quicker than you knew what to do with. That's part of that impulsivity. And your prefrontal cortex at that time is disengaged. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is the last to finish forming. It's the last landing site of information that comes up through the nervous system. So you're sending information up, it crosses over the right and left sides of the brain, it's integrating those two sides, and it lands in the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is your executive functioning center. It does logic, planning, decision-making, problem-solving, self-control, and looking at the bigger picture of long-term goals. Why am I doing this? What's the bigger scene? Your prefrontal cortex, when it's engaged, the parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system are in balance. So you've got what we call your lid on. So if this is your prefrontal cortex, if you take your hand in a fist, when you're under fight or flight, the prefrontal cortex disengages, the amygdala takes over. That's impulsive and reactive. And we all know that when somebody is impulsive and reactive, when they're in fight or flight, you talking with your logical brain is not going to get anywhere. You trying to talk them through it, trying to calm them down, talk them off the ledge, it's hitting up against a brick wall as well. When somebody is in fight or flight, they just need you to remain calm and be there to support them and love them. And if you can feel like you're getting out of control or you're starting to get angst because they are, and everyone's kind of on edge, that's the like, we just need to walk away and come back to this conversation. We need to walk away and come back to this situation. There's some kids that are, they're going to go full on into panic and start to have panic attacks. And those are situations as well of that can get parents really angst. But what can you do to just sit with them and they can feel your calm energy, even if it's you just like breathing, as deep as you can to help that. Well, that prefrontal cortex at about 25 for men, mid-20s, a little crossover on our pattern that we saw, that's when that's going to be fully developed. So if we've got a brain that's under constant stress, we're stuck in fight or flight, that lid's loose, we're triggered a lot quicker. We're also not developing that calming part of the brain that we want to, and we don't want to wire them for fight or flight. You can see when a prefrontal cortex, I often call it damaged, but it's really just disengaged. It interferes with normal movement, sensory impulses, intelligence, executive function, personality changes eventually, and abnormal emotional responses, difficulty in functioning in our daily lives. What'll often happen when somebody's in fight or flight is they'll start to develop very like OCD type tendencies, very controlling tendencies. They're not real flexible with things because they need to know what's going to happen and what to expect. You don't throw them into surprises because their nervous system is on edge all of the time. You need to put them in calming environments. They usually need to know their schedule. They don't want, they don't want anything outside of that schedule. Sometimes it's really hard to be like, oh, surprise, we're doing this instead. Because of that lack of adaptability that's there, they need to know because they're always on edge and they don't know how to calm down from it. And it can start to develop where many parents will start to notice that fight or flight response, depending on how long it's been there. The emotional development and the physical age they're not lining up. They can't quite emotionally do the things you would think they could do for that age, and that's part of that fight or flight and that brain development that needs to occur. And really, when you start to look at, okay, man, this just didn't happen because of COVID, right? And I'm not blaming it all on that, because there's a lot of people that are experiencing this beforehand. They're like, man, my kid was always high stress. They always, were triggered really quickly. They always were emotional. And we do know that it starts all the way back for many kids is even conception. I know for my own sake, having a stressful pregnancy, just not knowing anyone, starting a business, just things that my body was under stress, and you get your mother's nervous system. So it can almost pre-wire them for stress of, here I am on angst, on the edge all the time, feeling unstable myself. My baby's developing, they're getting my hormones, they're getting that blood bath, they're getting that neurological connection, they're stuck in fight or flight. And if they have a stressful birth on top of that, it can really start the cascade of the immune system or the nervous system was compromised even at birth, which we find 99% of kids have some form of neurological interference at birth, which is why I always recommend babies getting checked. Now that baby often will you'll see a baby that, didn't maybe nurse or latch well, got some ear infections, needed ear tubes, didn't sit well in school, was a hyperactive toddler. All of those things will start to lead up and just trigger the fight or flight until now they're teenagers. They're trying to take in their world. They're trying to grow up and they have all these other expectations of them. And sometimes it's just the expectations they put on themselves, quite honestly. I know I've got a kid that just puts his own stressors on himself. Now, what do? Well, it's so much of that fight or flight response that there's a lot more that needs to be processed. But knowing that this was normal physiological response to their environment and the stress and the way their brain was perceiving information. A lot of people think, oh man, it's a chemical imbalance. It's, it's a whole list of things that we try to come up with, and not knowing that typically symptoms are a natural physiological response to what's going on around you. And I had a wonderful conversation even with a postpartum doula who talked much about that, even with postpartum depression in women. She's like, usually it's a physiological response to their environment. They weren't set up for success. They were alone. They didn't have the support they needed. They were trying to have so many demands on them, cooking, cleaning, taking care of toddlers. That postpartum depression is the way your body should react when it feels like it's under stress, and it's not a hormone imbalance at all. And so, sometimes it can be, but there's varying degrees of which our body experiences stress, and a lot of our previous experience matters, especially when that brain development. If our kids had more stress younger, they're probably going to be more prone, and we never took care of it. It's kind of all stuck there, and we never took care of it as they start to age. They are going to be quicker to be triggered for stress. And if you remember that little picture I had showed you before with that fight or flight response neurologically, if you take a look at this brain and the spinal cord and how many neurological connections are in that sympathetic nervous system so you can respond really quickly, there's a ton. And then when you look over here at parasympathetic, to rest, digest, heal, breathe deeply, move your food through your body, go to the bathroom on time, have a normal cycle for girls, you can see that there's smaller neurological connections that's really close to the brain. And down here in the lower part of your nervous system, which we call the sacrum, there's a plexus down there that controls those. And this big nerve up to the brain is called your vagus nerve. And if any of you guys have heard of your vagus nerve before, that runs a huge part of that parasympathetic response. It communicates closely with that prefrontal cortex. Your vagus nerve means wandering. It's one of 2 of the 12 cranial nerves that leave the cranial vault, wander throughout all the organs, sending information back to headquarters to say, here's what's going on. And if that fight or flight response has such a hard pull and it's so triggered, our vagus nerve starts to lose what we call tone. It's not able to do its job. It's not able to be energized. It doesn't have what it needs to be able to control all of those organs and glands, nor can it send the right information back to headquarters, back to the brain. So there's 9 times more fibers in that connection. When people talk about the gut brain or the brain gut connection, they're talking about the vagus nerve. Also talking about all the serotonin and all of the hormones that are being released in that gut. It's traveling through that vagus nerve, and when that's going to be dampened because that fight or flight response is taken over, we start to see low vagal nerve tone is what we call it. And we call our vagus nerve a nervous system hack, because if you can stimulate that vagus nerve, you are going to watch the body start to calm down and change around really, really quickly. And what we found through the science and the research, what I just think is incredible, when you're delivering a chiropractic adjustment, is you're not changing along the spine. The change is in the prefrontal cortex in the brain. It actually triggers the right and left side of the brain to sync together, prefrontal cortex to engage, and that brain to feel calm, learn something new, that executive function to take over, the goal planning, the setting. You can almost, when that prefrontal cortex is engaged, that overwhelm feeling is lessened because you're not so close to the picture. Whenever we're under stress, just everything feels so overwhelming. Prefrontal cortex engages, you can almost back up from the picture, see a better view, realize all the parts and pieces that are going into things, instead of feeling like everything is right here in my face all the time and I have to react to it. So once again, it's a normal physiological response to the stressors that are there. And that vagus nerve starts to get its tone back pretty quickly, and we measure it in our scans as well and let that body calm down. Next is looking, once we start to get the body and the brain calm, we're saying, okay, now let's pay attention closer to the environment. What's going on? What are you putting on your skin? What are you putting in your mouth? How's your emotional health as far as what are you telling yourself? There's a lot of negative self-talk with teens. They're looking at social media, comparing themselves to others, not realizing that this isn't reality. It's a lot that their brain, once again, is still trying to be developed. And it's hard. It's a hard thing to conceptualize. Text messaging, instead of real language back, amongst their friends, and especially when they're in school in masks. I had a lot of girls that were very triggered by that because they didn't know how their friends were responding to what they were saying, and they're already, feeling awkward themselves. They might be already having social anxiety. Now they don't know something they said, how it landed. Did that make their friend feel happy, sad? Was that good? Is it funny? Unknown, because you can't see the social response there. And that was really triggering a lot of, especially girls, and I'm sure it was boys too, but it's a pretty big deal. We recommend a lot of outlets for stress if they aren't moving their body, if they're spending a lot of time on social media, to get their bodies moving, get them active, get a journal, even for some kids. What we find, we call this a vagal nerve ladder. So if any of you guys know the polyvagal nerve theory and what you look at with that vagus nerve, it's got a ladder, a hierarchy that's there. And when you're at the bottom of the ladder, it's more of that disconnection and that depression that I talked about earlier, where you've now come to an exhausted point in your life, where the sympathetic nervous system will finally just say, I need a break. Parasympathetic then takes over because it's been trying for so long. And when you're stuck there trying to heal and repair, all the energy is here at the core. You don't have energy for the motor system, and you're tired. You don't want to move. It's fatigue. It's exhaustion. That's the bottom of the ladder. You're completely disengaged, and usually you don't want to do anything. You don't feel like doing anything. Literally, your body doesn't want to move. And when they're at that place, it's just getting the body moving. You actually do have to start re-engaging that sympathetic nervous system for movement. It does a lot of our movement before you can then get to the higher place, which is that prefrontal cortex engaged, and you're in the ventral part of that ladder, and the body feels like it's calm. It feels like it has an executive function to tackle and goal set and do the things that they need to. As I mentioned before, love, not lectures. When someone's in fight or flight, they're not listening to your logic. They're disengaged, and your logical brain isn't going to help, nor is your fight or flight brain, because that's just going to perpetuate the process. So, there's some lecture parents out there like, well, I tell them. They're not listening. Okay. Unfortunately, they're not listening. It's just the way that they're wired. So that's not really going to help. Other things to do to stimulate that parasympathetic response, to help that pull, that vagal nerve tone, deep breathing. It's going to help that, when I was talking about it, innervating all those internal organs, that diaphragm, as you pull it down with belly breathing, it's going to help activate that as well and calm the system. Because most of the time when we're stressed and we're anxious, all the energy is here. It's up in the chest. We're holding it up in the muscles. We're breathing with short rhythmic breaths, activating more of that fight or flight, if you remember that nerve chart, through the mid-back, instead of that calming response that we need. So deep breathing, essential oils that can calm in the air, things that are going to get them to relax before they even know it. Epsom salt baths, things that are going to stimulate that to stop the pull of that fight or flight response is really, really going to be key. And then we usually add support in for the brain and the nervous system. Omega-3s, which most people are deficient in, Neuro-Opti-Mag. So if anybody's got their kid on magnesium, make sure it's a form that crosses that blood-brain barrier and helps with those neural connections, not a magnesium citrate. They might need that if they've got a sluggish bowel, but that's not going to do the same thing in supporting that gut. Because once we start to see over time that fight or flight response is taken over, the digestive response has turned down, they need gut support. They need that gut to be able to have those cells replenished and healed because they haven't been getting what they need. And sometimes there's even like a leaky gut that's going on. And most importantly is that neuroscan to figure out, is your child stuck in fight or flight? Is this what's happening? Is this why they're being triggered so quickly? And we've got other scans that come along with it that paint a bigger picture of, are they in shutdown, or are they still just in that hyper mode? And what can we do as a sequential adjustments to be able to get this child and this beautiful human back to where their brain feels calm, and then we live there. We change the environment. We let the body start to heal itself the way that it is designed to, which is just absolutely incredible and beautiful. And here's my little picture again. Some people are like, how long is this going to take? Which is why I usually have this picture, like what's going on. When they're younger, it doesn't take as much effort as it takes when we're older. But I think when you look at this picture and you're like, how beautiful is that the brain can also change and change for the good. We look and we're like, oh man, all this stress that's going on. Holy cow. Well, look, it can change for the better. It could change for the worse if we keep them there. When you look at this, I'm like, look at that. A 70-year-old can change. Isn't this wonderful? It's going to take a little bit more effort than we might want to be putting in at age 70. But it still has the ability to change. There's neuroplasticity. Everyone's brain is changing. Birth to 3, there's 1 million new neurological connections happening a second. Teens, they're still making millions of new neurological connections every single day, week, month. And when we're in our 30s and 40s, we make that many in a year. So, things have slowed down a little bit, but we can still do it. And it's still encouraging that once we start to change the way the brain is perceiving a threat, perceiving what's going on around them, it can be calm, it can feel safe. And then you start to see all those beautiful, wonderful glimpses of when your child, and hopefully they're not glimpses, but of when your child is calm, when they're happy, when they're smiling. Because I know when you've got a kid that's stressed out, when this kid is feeling anxious, you are going to also, especially as a mom, and I'm sure there's dads on here too, you're also going to have that same physiological response of being aware of that you get very tied to your children's emotions. And, it's just something that is, I feel like, really on a mom's heart. You'll probably know before they know that they're being calm. So you're just going to see them lighten up in their face. You're going to see more smiles and laughs and hugs. And that's definitely, where our story was with my little guy. And this was even, he's not little really anymore, but pre-COVID, when you started to see the anxiety, I knew he was having it at the same time. My heart would start racing, and I'm like, oh, I got to check on Hunter. He's got to be, stressed out. And sure enough, he was. So there's a huge tie with I feel like moms, I'm sure dads too, but that connection that's there. So just giving yourself some grace as well. Do the same things, deep breathe, Epsom salts, journaling, get checked by a chiropractor. If you guys aren't around here, and you're listening, because I know there's some people that I find out they're from all over the place. There's neuro-based chiropractors in a directory that we have that you can find that look at the brain and the body and look at this subluxation complex, look at the neurological responses that are going on, and helping them overcome it. So like I said, I'm here to help other moms have their best life and families and kids. I don't think anything should hold them back from them being their very best selves. I don't think anybody should ever tell anyone that they can't be whoever and whatever they want to do and be. I think we're here for a very specific purpose. The more energy we can put it to that purpose and take it away from that stress response, the better the world is. So thanks for listening, you guys. I know it's late at 7:41, and you're welcome. I'm glad. On here is a little QR code. I don't know if you guys can scan that from where you're at. If you can, just let them know you listened to this webinar. Complicated cases, my office to come in for a scan are $300. Anybody else off the street, it's $189. And when I'm talking complicated, we do see a lot of kids, nonverbal spectrum kids that we help through their life. But when you come to one of my webinars, you get pre-educated. You're welcome. Scan that QR code for $100 to come in, get your kid scanned, and T-balls, and see if that's what's keeping them stuck. See if their brain has been stuck in that fight or flight and unable to receive their environment the way that we just pray that they can. So thank you guys, and have a wonderful evening. I'm glad you joined me.